This is The Toss-Up, where we take a look at some of the topics facing the world of college sports and give a little bit of the history behind some of them. We're not trying to change your mind, we just want to dive deeper into the topics that keep you tuned in to the teams you love. College is a dynamic concept, but if you were to break it down into simple terms, college is where young adults prepare themselves for careers. This is no different for student athletes. Although a large percentage of student athletes will go pro in something other than sports, it's important to look at the rights of those who will. The NBA recently made rules changes to their declaration process, as an athlete can now declare for the draft without an agent, go through talent evaluations in the draft combine, and still return to school with their eligibility intact. With those changes, the NBA still isn't perfect. Many question the age minimum of draft eligibility, some saying that allowing players to leave college after 1 year destroys the sanctity of their education. Others saying requiring athletes to go to school in the first place is unnecessary. Then there is the NFL, who requires athletes to be out of high school for at least 3 years, and even after those 3 years must request the league's approval to enter the draft early. Lastly, there is the MLB, which is the most liberal of all in the process. In the NBA, a player is eligible for selection if the player is a resident of the U.S. or Canada, and the player has never before signed a major league or minor league contract. That means high school players and college players. And if said players don't like the result of the draft, they have the right to not sign with a team and try again next year. So who does it right? Which draft process is the most fair and justified? Now let me introduce to you my panel. Alongside me, IU Athletics broadcaster Griffin Weinberg, IU STV baseball beat reporter Austin Machicardi, and IU STV sports director Jock Stevens. Now to start the conversation, I think the first question to ask is, what should be the age minimum for draft eligibility for any sport, and should they be different based on the sport?
Well, if you don't mind, I will take this question first. I personally think, as we discussed before the show, you're a grown man, you should be able to enter any job that you want. If it was going to be a biology major, or if it was somebody who did very well with robotics when they were in high school, they'd be able to go and get that job right out of high school. They wouldn't have to wait for some draft or wait for some league or wait for some permission to get there. They'd be able to go ahead and get that job. And if you think you're good enough to take the job, I don't see any problem with you trying to put in that application and seeing if you're good enough, and that includes professional sports, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with that pretty much. I mean, the only questionable sport I think is football, like in the NFL. I think that, I agree with the sentiment that if you think you can play in the NFL coming out of high school, then go for it. If you mess up, that's your fault because you thought that you could do it. If I were to have like an eligibility rule on like going into the NFL, I would say maybe 2 years of college. If anything that, because there are so many players where they're not fully developed, they're not fast enough, they're not strong enough, just not big enough for the NFL to get along with that. So maybe, like a 2-year rule on football, but that would be about it. Everything else, I agree with everything you're saying, Jock. If you want to go straight into the workforce out of high school, feel free to do it.
I really feel like just let the athletes decide, because, you should know whether or not you're good enough to make it in the league. I mean, football obviously is a special case because it's such a physical sport, but guys such as Jadeveon Clowney, the physical athlete, he's a freak. He shouldn't have had to go to college. He probably could have made it, especially having to wait 3 years. He shouldn't have had to wait 3 years.
Maurice Clarett probably could have made it, straight out of school, too. He's a beast at Ohio State.
Adrian Peterson.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why they do it, but at the same time, as I said earlier, and as, it sounds like we're all agreeing on this one, if you're grown enough and you're big enough and you think you're good enough, go ahead and go for it.
Now, looking at each of the individual sports, I think we should start off with the NBA. They recently made the rule change that you can test the waters before deciding to move on and go to the draft. Do you guys like that approach, or should it be expanded in any means, or what are your thoughts on the matter?
I don't know why they didn't do it before this, because last year was the first year where they did.
Correct.
So last year was the first year they did. I don't know why they didn't do it before, because so many times college basketball players, they think that they have what it takes to play in the NBA, But when they get through the draft and they go through the combine, maybe something goes wrong, and then their draft eligibility just kind of drops a little bit. And I think I like the rule where everyone can just go and declare and then just see exactly what they feel, see what the NBA scouts are saying about them. I feel like that should be kind of the sentiment in every sport. I mean, obviously there'd be a different process for NFL and MLB, but I'm a big fan of that because it just gives you a chance to look and say, hey, maybe I have what it takes. Maybe I'll have to stay another year or so. I'm not too sure, but I'm a fan of the rule.
Yeah, the only thing that comes into play when you do that, though, is whether or not the person has hired an agent or something like that. And that's where it should get a little bit of a gray area because you still want to kind of sort of maintain that amateur status or the idea of amateur status in college sports. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, as long as they haven't hired an agent, I think they should be able to go ahead, test the waters, see if they could come out, maybe make a couple of more $1 million this year versus next year, last year, whatever the case may be. I'm going to have to side with you on that one, Griffin.
I really like what the NBA has done. I think that they should allow players. I think that all of the college players should. It shouldn't just be star players. I think everybody should just say, oh, yeah, I'm going to be in the NBA draft this year. And then they should go and they should get the evaluation because what harm does it do? They can still go back and they're still eligible and they can still play. So what's the point in not declaring for the draft?
And the sentiment about declaring for the draft, testing the waters, brings up another question about whether basketball players should be forced to go to college in the first place. It used to be that you could go straight out of high school. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, this is where it gets a little bit interesting for me, which goes back to what I said earlier. I personally do feel, I'm a fan, just in case no one has been watching our product all year. I'm a big fan of Georgia Tech. And I personally do feel that that's one of the things that sort of ruined that basketball program under Paul Hewitt, was a lot of one and dones. Now, a Kentucky does it well. A Duke does it well. But at some schools, it hurts when you bring in this good 4- or 5-star talent for that 1 year, that one run to a national title loss against UConn. I'm getting a bit off track here, I know. But you
Don't
bring
cry.
them in for
Don't
that.
cry. No
I'm not
tears.
going to cry. I'm not going to cry.
No
I
tears
promise.
were shed in the making of this show.
Exactly. So, you bring them in for that little while, but then you're ruined once they leave, if they leave early. I mean, you've got Bosch. He was only there not too long at Georgia Tech. A lot of players, Shumpert, not there too long. It ruins some of the smaller programs. Kentucky is a basketball banner school. Indiana is a basketball banner school. Duke, they're going to survive stuff like that. A program like Georgia Tech, a program like Wichita State maybe, they're not going to survive stuff like that. It ruins the basketball product. But as far as the NBA, that's all they care about, putting the best on their court. So.
I really think that players should be able to go out of high school. I mean, if you look in the past, you look at guys like Kobe Bryant, you look at LeBron James. What if they made them go to college? What if Kobe had to lace up for a year in college instead of going straight to the pros? I mean, they could, change careers. What if a guy goes to college and they get hurt? What if, all of a sudden they get hurt and they're never going to go pro now when they could have gone pro as an 18-year-old?
Well, that's the risk I think you take in any of them. I don't think we should be determining that on whether or not somebody's going to get injured. I mean, you might, lose your best calculator if you're a math major or something like that. Things happen. That's life. I don't think that should have any. I personally don't think that should have any bearing on whether or not they go out of high school. Whether I might get injured if I go to college versus going to the pros.
I do think though that it could create a better NCAA product because of course, because guys like Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis probably didn't need that year at Kentucky. He should have gone straight to the league. Instead of having these guys that are just so much better than everybody else out there, just dominating. Maybe, those guys go up to the league. They might take a couple lumps in their first few years. But then, down at the college level, we have more even matches. We don't have teams that are out there with, 8 one-and-done freshmen on their roster, an entire rotation that just changes year after year, just eating other teams alive.
Should you imagine how different the NBA would be if LeBron James had to go to college for 1 year? Would he have ended up in Cleveland? I don't know.
He might have decided to start off his skills in South Florida. You never know.
Exactly. You don't know. Like I said before, when we were talking about whatever the question was that we talked about at the beginning of the show, if you think that you can do it, then go for it.
Right.
Yeah. If you think you can do it, then go for it.
Because I don't see him having enrolled at Ohio State. I don't.
No. I
don't know where he would have gone, but I don't see him going to Ohio State.
I don't know. Never know. Doesn't matter. It was in the past.
Well, one sport that does follow this concept is the MLB, and they're extremely liberal about how they handle things. You can enter the draft in high school, or you can go as a college athlete, and if you don't like where you're drafted or the team you're drafted by, you could just go back to whatever you were at. You could go back to school and continue to play where you were playing before. Do you guys like that process, or do you think it's a little too harmful to the actual teams?
I think that the way that the MLB has it set up is amazing. I mean, it might not be great for the teams because, you know, they might have a high draft pick who decides to go back to school or something, but for the players, it's tremendous because, you know, you can go right out of high school if you want, and if you go in the 39th round to some team you couldn't care less about, then go to college, go to junior college for a year and then re-enter. Go back to junior college and re-enter a third time. Or you can just go to, I mean, you can commit to a 4-year university and then you can play your couple years there and then enter the draft. And then if you don't like that, you can still go back. It doesn't take a large commitment from the student athlete to be in the MLB draft, and I really like that.
I think one of the main differences too is that the structure of baseball is quite different than the structure of basketball and the structure of football. You don't have that sort of minor league farm system in football and basketball with the similar structure that you do in baseball, which is why it's a lot more capable for someone to, you know, possibly sign with a team or consider signing with a team and say, you know what, I want to try for a better team, and then wait those 3 years before they have to go back again. I mean, hockey does it even better at the college level because in hockey, you know, you do have to wait that year if you don't like your contract. So you can actually get a contract, kind of, sort of, but you still have to make a decision, and if you don't, then you have to renegotiate and things like that. I'm okay with that, though. I just think that football and basketball probably need to introduce more of a farm system. Maybe if they do that, then we won't have some of these issues. Then kids probably can go right out of high school.
Yeah, they have the startups for that. You know, I mean, like the D League, or I guess the G League is what they're calling it now for the NBA, the Gatorade League. It's so stupid. I don't know why they're doing that. But and then like the NFL, you know, they have.
It's called branding. That's
branding. Yeah. Whatever the leagues that they're trying to come up with now to like try to get more college players, they have that all going on. I like it though for the MLB. Players that get freedom. That's what it is.
It'll be interesting to see if there are any changes in other leagues like the NBA, the NFL to model that, or maybe the MLB changes their way and models the NBA and the NFL.
I would hope not. I think that'd be terrible if the MLB were to change, in my personal opinion.
Anything is possible, but that'll really wrap us up as we're done with the show. And be sure to continue with the discussion on our Twitter page at IUSTV Sports and our Facebook page at IUSTV Sports. You can always give any suggestions for the show and ask any questions you might have. Toss it up. Find out if we'll catch it. Until next Sunday, be proud and cheer loud.